after last week's homily that I sung the introduction to some of those wonderful tunes, I was tempted to preach on St. Paul's reading that Brandon read when he said, "Have no anxiety at all," and I could have sang that wonderful jingle, "Don't worry, be happy," but I said, no. This is the third Sunday in a row we're talking about vineyards, or hearing about vineyards, so I thought it'd be apropos to talk about vineyards. If Charles Dickens, you see what I have here? If Charles Dickens was writing a book about our first reading and gospel today, you know what it might have been called? Great Expectations. I thought for sure you'd have guessed that in a heartbeat. Great Expectations. This type of grape, by the way, is called Vitis vinifera, the first cultivated plants mentioned in the Bible. Vitis vinifera. Grapes, grapevines. Anyone ever see grapevines? Anyone ever pick grapes? Did you know that I was in the commercial winemaking business for a while? 5 years? And in that process, you're not only making wine, you are trying very hard to grow grapes that look like this. But you know, it's not easy. There are wild animals to contend with. There's fertilizing to do. There's pruning to do. There's training of vines. There's netting to do because birds love to get the grapes when they're just ripe enough. And as you're picking them, who else wants the juice besides you but yellow jackets? So, a labor-intensive thing to get to this point alone, never mind the winemaking process. Labor-intensive. You know that many of our wines come from a lovely area in California called Sonoma. And I read this just the other day. This year's harvest in Sonoma has been a huge concern for a few months when cool temperatures and record spring rains threaten to ruin the vintage. In fact, the Sonoma County Wine Grape Commission reports that yields will be down anywhere from 20 to 25% because those rains knocked the flowers right off the vines and resulted in fewer and smaller berries on each cluster of grapes. That 20 to 25% translates to a few $1 million in revenue for Sonoma County. Labor intensive, very, you put so much work into something like this and you expect it to produce fruit, right? How many of you have ever planted a garden? You know what it's like that when you plant the seed, you kind of give it some TLC, or if you're planting a tender shoot, and you want it to grow, right? You take time to water, to fertilize, you do all that stuff. It's a labor of love. You want it to produce fruit. You know, people make investments with things like grapevines and gardens, but people also make investments in people. Parents spend a great deal of money and make great sacrifices to send their children to good schools and hope that they produce good fruit. How many of your parents sent you for piano lessons, or violin lessons, or dance lessons, and expected you to produce fruit, right? Parents do that. We make investments in people. You make investments. First time you came here as a student, you tried to meet other people. You tried to make friends. It's a labor-intensive thing. You make investments hoping that your friends won't turn on you. They won't betray your confidence. You hope that they produce fruit. How many of you spend hours in Belk, Club Belk? studying, poring over the books, hoping that your investment in your studies will produce A's, right? You do it all the time. And sometimes it doesn't turn out exactly the way we want. For the longest time, God has been investing in people. You know that. We could go through the whole salvation history. Moses, the prophets, the New Testament figures. God invests in people hoping that they'll produce fruit. But unfortunately, sometimes they don't. Or at least not always. A story I read not long ago from a woman named Elizabeth Sherrill. The book is Heaven Begins Now. And the story is about a man named Max Ellerbush. In 1978, a man traveled to Cincinnati to attend the funeral of Max Ellerbush. Max had been like a father to this man for 20 years. Nothing unusual except that as a 15-year-old boy, this man had taken his mother's car and struck and killed Max's 5-year-old son, Craig, as he was heading to kindergarten the week before Christmas. Max, his wife, and his family were grief-stricken beyond imagination. But not long after the accident, when the driver was apprehended, it was a hit and run, a surprised courtroom heard Max ask that charges be dropped. Instead, he wanted to give the boy who killed his son a job and help towards his education. Max did all that and more, virtually adopting the 15-year-old George into his family. Max shared his home, his time, and his understanding with the troubled youth. You and I, hearing that story, are probably scratching our heads and saying, how could he? How could he not only forgive this young boy, but take him into his home and raise him as his own? Is he crazy? Well, if we think Max Ellerbush is crazy, we also might think God is crazy. Because the parable we heard today is about God. God is the vineyard owner. God sent the prophets for the people of Israel to listen to and hear the word and heed his commandments. And they refused, even tried to kill him. And then he said, I'll send my only beloved son. They'll listen to him. And you know the story. They didn't. God still invests in us, and he expects us, like Max, to produce fruit. The fruit that St. Paul talked about when he talked to the Philippians in the second reading, to live lives of truth, to be honorable, to be just, to live pure and holy lives, to be lovely and gracious, to live gospel qualities of compassion, generosity, and forgiveness and mercy. Those are the fruits of the kingdom, my sisters and brothers, that God asks us to produce each and every day. Because it's not different for us. It wasn't different for the people of Israel. God sends his only Son to us. We cherish his presence. We hear the word when we come here. We take in the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ in communion. He asks us to produce the fruit of love.